Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
When it comes to staying calm, cool, and collected, we've all heard that terminology before at some point in time throughout your life. This can be a challenge. There can be a lot of different factors that can alter our perception within our own environment in terms of how we manage stress or how we actually handle the stress itself. So I wanted to talk today in regards to theanine, because I think theanine is one of the most useful amino acids out there when it comes to stress management. And there is so much science and research out there that really reinforce the utilization of theanine. And oftentimes we refer to it in its nomenclature of L-Theanine. And so when they put the L in front, we're just talking about the actual structural form of theanine. But I want to talk about all of the really interesting and unique studies that have come out recently on theanine. They've been looking at theanine for many, many years, but there's some new research that has come out that once again is just reinforcing what we already know about this very, very powerful amino acid. So I am Amanda Williams, MD, MPH, and let's get right to it. Let's talk a little bit about theanine and what exactly theanine is. When we think about amino acids, we know that amino acids play a role as being that building block to proteins, and they are heavily relied on in the body for many different functions. Well, theanine is quite unique because this is a kind of an analog of glutamate and glutamine. So when we look at all of the different amino acids that are out there, we think about things like tryptophan and arginine, and we also have glutamine. We know glutamine has many different functions that are incredibly important in the human body. So theanine is actually plant-derived, and predominantly where we find the highest abundance of theanine coming from plants is going to be coming from green tea. So this is a kind of just a disclaimer, because sometimes when we think about amino acids, many times people think about, the different sources from which we derive them. Tryptophan, for example, we know that that's coming from certain foods like turkey, for example. Pumpkin seed has a good amount of tryptophan in it, but theanine is really quite unique in the sense that we find a high abundance of this analog of the glutamate and glutamine in green tea, which is why green tea touts so many different medicinal benefits beyond that of just the powerful antioxidant that it possesses. So when we think about the role of something like glutamine, for example, because if we look at theanine, we say theanine is basically kind of this blend, an analog of glutamate and glutamine, and we look specifically at what glutamine is doing in the body when it comes to our intestinal lining, for example, for the best uptake of different nutrients into our system. We know that glutamine plays a really important role in that because it helps to maintain the integrity of the intestinal mucosa. When we look at glutamine's role for cellular energy, when we look at its role for lipid synthesis, for regulation of acid-base balance, we say, okay, well then theanine would make a lot of sense in terms of how it's actually working in the human body. And we know that theanine itself has been really most widely researched when it comes to stress and management of stress. And the reason why is because we know that theanine is working in a means to actually decrease the binding capacity of the excitatory neurotransmitter glutamate. So remember, we have glutamine and glutamate. So glutamate is excitotoxic. And if we have too much of this can create problems. And we know that theanine actually can downregulate the glutamate, but at the same time, it can help to enhance or upregulate the production of GABA. And GABA is the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. That's what allows for that calming effect. Now, what's interesting is that when we have different imbalances between the neurotransmitters glutamate and GABA, then we can certainly start to see some of those clinical implications from that. And this is why oftentimes people will utilize, say, even prescribed medications that help to downregulate glutamate and enhance GABA production. So how theanine is actually working in the brain is quite interesting. And think about this. We're using an amino acid that is derived from green tea that has this ability to inhibit that excitotoxicity that's occurring because of too much glutamate, and it helps to enhance the calming properties of GABA. So it's actually mimicking GABA's effects. Now we know that the prescription anti-anxiety drugs also do this, but we also know that those prescription anti-anxiety drugs can come with a whole slew of different side effects, which can certainly become problematic over time. Now, what's also interesting about the research and science behind L-theanine is it's not only that it's very targeted towards that management of stress by helping to enhance that calming property of GABA in the body, but we also recognize that theanine is playing a role in terms of having a protective measure to the neurons in the brain. Those are your brain cells, to help to promote cognitive function. And this is really very important when we think about aging gracefully. For example, we want to do everything in our power to make sure that we have the cognitive function throughout our life. And if we have excess oxidative stress, which can lead to problems with neuronal apoptosis or programmed cell death within the brain, then that certainly is a big issue. So we know that glutamate, once again, plays a role in this, and they've actually even been able to see where glutamate is impacting different neurodegenerative disorders such as Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease. So if we can help to downregulate that glutamate, then we are helping to enhance the neuron lifespan itself. So a lot of really, really unique and cool studies out there on theanine. So let's look at what the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation published when it came to theanine. And this is important because remember, we're talking about neurodegenerative diseases. So we're stepping outside of that box of what we just usually consider theanine in the world of stress. So we're actually jumping into a cognitive decline state. So what the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation found was that theanine not only appears to be incredibly safe, but it has positive short-term effects on cognitive function, blood pressure, as well as sleep. And they were looking at the neuroprotective benefits in terms of brain health. And they recognize that being that L-theanine had this really finite ability to even lower blood pressure, this could help to enhance proper blood flow to the brain. And you may think, well, how is it controlling blood pressure in terms of blood pressure regulation? Well, we don't have to look much further than to see how L-theanine, being that it is an amino acid, has a really nice way, similar to arginine, for the enhancing of the release of nitric oxide. So most time when we think about blood pressure regulation, we know that that's driven by nitric oxide in the body. So the more nitric oxide release, the more vasodilation. We usually correlate that, like I said, generally with L-arginine. But we also now recognize that L-theanine also plays a significant role in improving that nitric oxide production within the endothelial cells. So those are the cells that line the blood vessels. So if we can have greater nitric oxide, more vasodilation, that means blood pressure is going to come down, but we're also going to have appropriate blood flow to the extremities as well as to the brain. So a lot of different ways in which theanine continues to show its real powerful punch. Now, there has been many different studies looking specifically at theanine when it comes to memory, attention, relaxation. And through the Alzheimer's Foundation here, they were looking at a wide variety of those studies. And they were looking at meta-analysis, which is, when you're clumping together a group of randomized controlled studies that all have the same theme. And they were looking at open label trials. They were looking at, in-house laboratory studies. And continuously, they have found that the human clinical research suggests that theanine plays this really important and powerful role in terms of having these neurotropic effects, which is brain supporting properties to it. And this is one of the reasons as to why there's been more of a push outside of that world of just utilizing L-theanine for the properties that we know of for targeting stress response. Now, certainly when we look at things such as generalized anxiety disorder, we know that L-theanine has been shown to be a very powerful adjuvant treatment in the setting of generalized anxiety disorder. There was a study that was published last year in the General Psychiatry Research Journal looking specifically at that, looking at L-theanine as a adjuvant therapy for those who have been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, and finding not only was it beneficial in terms of targeting the actual anxiety symptoms, but they also found that the L-theanine was very supportive in one of the secondary symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder, which was sleep disturbances. So I think that that's just another important way to really recognize just how powerful this amino acid coming from green tea actually is. Now, here's another new study that was from 2019 and published in the Nutrients Journal, talking about the effects of L-theanine when it comes to cognitive function in healthy adults. So this is done in a setting where it's not like we're taking people who have mild cognitive impairment, dementia, or Alzheimer's, but they actually just wanted to see how would theanine work in people who functionally should already be, having the good ability to store memory, create memories, have focus and attention. So in this particular study, what they did is they gave these healthy individuals theanine, but then they also had set up an environment that would kind of exacerbate stress for them. And they wanted to see how would their cognitive functions work in that environment. Well, interestingly enough, they found that the theanine had the potential to promote mental health and really allow for a better handling within the human body and the brain functionality when it came to stressful environments. So once again, just, study after study continue to drive home that point that we recognize why theanine is really so helpful and so incredibly beneficial. So here's another interesting little study when it comes to the neuropharmacology of L-theanine and looking at how it has these possible neuroprotective and cognitive enhancing benefits to this. And this was published in the Journal of Pharmacotherapy. And they were looking at how it was working within different neurotransmitter pathways. So they always recognize that GABA pathway, but they will also recognize that it was actually supporting serotonergic pathways. So for serotonin, dopamine, and even the MDA receptor sites, which is really quite important when we look at different ways in which the brain itself handles and deals with stress. And when we can see this in clinical research trials, and it continues to kind of, as I mentioned, reinforce the power of L-theanine, and they've done this in the setting of PTSD, as I mentioned, generalized anxiety, people who have panic disorders, and then looking at it in the setting of acute stress situations. Also looking at it in the setting of cognitive impairment. So now that we know more about L-theanine and all of the different ways in which L-theanine can certainly be utilized in the human body, it makes a lot of sense that when we think about the stressful environment that many people live within, maybe it's your work environment, maybe you go to school, maybe it's at home and family issues that tend to arise, or maybe you just have more of a tendency to get stressed out when you know you're going to be around family, or have certain meetings that you have at work. Theanine is a really lovely way to make sure that your little neurons in your brain are not flooded with excess amount of glutamate, this excitotoxic substance, and to make sure that we are not succumbing to oxidative stress to the point that it starts to impact our brain's ability to kind of bounce back. And then we have those neurons go into that apoptosis mode, which is that programmed cell death. If that happens, then we are basically moving the goalpost when it comes to the aging process itself, which is why we look at theanine and we say, okay, we know just from the clinical research alone that this does have these neuroprotective properties. We recognize that it can help to support relaxation and support healthy mood within the body. And it provides all of these numerous benefits that so many people can yield support from. So I definitely encourage you to check out L-theanine. Oftentimes people want to know, well, how much L-theanine should I be using? And it really varies. L-theanine is so wonderful in the sense that it's one of those nutrients where I say if you feel like you're a little bit on edge, or maybe your sleep hasn't been that great, or you know that you have this high pressure meeting or something that is coming up in your life, and you want to be able to manage that a little bit more acutely, then you would probably utilize your theanine, maybe 1 to 2 capsules, taken as many times as you need to throughout the day. But oftentimes people will find maybe taking 1 capsule in the morning, maybe 1 in the afternoon, 1 in the evening, when they have more of that high pressure schedule. Now, for others, they may find just taking 2 caps together is all that they need. So you kind of play around with it to find what suits your needs best. And it is one of those things where I always say it's a great thing to keep, ladies, in your pocketbook, or, definitely always have some on hand, because you never know when your environment can change and you have a little bit more stress, and you want to be able to protect your brain cells and be able to manage that stress all at the same time. So definitely look at L-theanine in assisting you in doing that. So that is all that I have for you for today. I want to thank you so much for tuning in to the Invite Health podcast. Remember, you can find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to podcasts, or by visiting invitehealth.com/podcast. Now, do make sure that you subscribe and you leave us a review. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health, and we will see you next time for another episode of the Invite Health podcast.